Hey everyone, welcome back to Wanderlusting Lawyer. We are well into the month of November, so that means that while there aren't tons of people walking Caminos right now, there are some, but this is really the prime season when planning gets going or ramps up for next year's Camino. People really tend to hit the trail in March and then more so in April, May, and beyond. So I wanted to talk about Camino motivation today, and more specifically, a question I think a lot of beginners or newbies to the Camino have, and I know that I asked myself when I first really got into my mind that I wanted to walk the Camino is, do you need to have a religious motivation for walking? You know, at its core, this is a pilgrimage. Santiago is where the relics, the bones of the Apostle James, are said to be buried in the magnificent cathedral, or encased, not buried. And originally, you know, pilgrims walked the Camino to attempt to reduce punishment for their sins. So it's totally reasonable to think, you know, this is something that really to do, I should be having a religious motivation, but that, at least in my experience, is absolutely not the case. And I was interested in this, so I looked into it a little bit, and there's a website called CaminoWays.com. I think they organize Camino trips for people, but a couple of years ago they did, I think it was 2019, and 2019 was a massive year in terms of pilgrim traffic. They did a survey asking people what their top motivation was for walking the Camino. And apparently this is how the breakdown of the answers was. So what do you think before I say it? Think in your head, do you think the number one reason was religious reasons or not? If you answered not, you are correct, but only just barely. So apparently 28.2% of those who answered said that they were looking for new challenges, a new adventure, a new challenge. And just slightly less, 28.0%, said they were walking for religious or spiritual reasons. I think that's fair if you include the word spiritual in there. I don't think that number corresponds at all to what my experience was just with respect to religious reasons, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. Close behind, 17.8% said they were looking to escape their daily life and connect with nature. 10.8% said that they were doing it for health and exercise reasons. 4.6% said to learn about culture. I guess the culture of Spain and Portugal and France, wherever they're walking. I think within that, I wouldn't be surprised if, you know, some people were doing it to practice their language skills. And then 8.8% answered other. I hope that adds up to 100%. I didn't add it all up. That was the information that I was able to get from the Camino Ways survey. One thing I was surprised not to see in here, and I don't know if it was a possible category or if they just kind of forgot or thought this was subsumed under another category, is the reason to kind of grieve and move on from a loss, whether that's a loss of a loved one, a loss of a job, of a life you thought you were gonna have, you know, many different types of losses the Camino has been used to remedy. So what do I think about these numbers? You know, I think they look fairly representative of my experience. I will say, I mean, for me, I would have thought the answer in terms of religious, spiritual reasons was maybe 10% or less, but I'm guessing that this was a survey geared mostly towards English speakers, and potentially, I don't know if it's an American website actually, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was. And I say that because the people who I met on the Camino who were doing it specifically or for overriding religious reasons were all Americans. They were all Americans. They were oftentimes women in their 40s, 50s, 60s, walking alone or with friends. I met a group in 2018, a group of Catholic priests that were walking, and many of whom actually walked in their frocks. I don't know. I'm not Catholic. I don't know. They're priest outfits. So in the heat of July, that's pretty committed. That's pretty much strong commitment. You know, I mean, even in terms of our discussions that we would have, I mean, Camino discussions can get pretty deep. I only remember a handful of conversations that really touched on the religious or even spiritual question, and they were almost exclusively with Americans. So you definitely don't need to have a religious or spiritual reason to walk the Camino. You'll be among plenty of company if you are walking because you want a new challenge, you want to get out of the country for the first time, or even if you simply don't have a reason. You know, people talk about this thing called the Camino Calling, and I think it's so true. I think somehow the Camino calls every one of us, whether that's because you heard it from somebody else, you saw the movie The Way, which, you know, if you saw that movie, you know that the main characters were walking for all different reasons, quit smoking, lose weight, grieve the loss of a son. I can't remember what the fourth guy, the Irish gentleman, was walking for. I have to watch it again, but you'll be in very good company no matter what your reason is, and even if your reason is, I still don't know. And I think that's something to be aware of as well. I mean, I know that I met people, and one woman in particular comes to mind who's walking, and she just was like, I still don't know why I'm here. I don't know my reason. I don't know if I should stop. I don't feel like I'm being authentic in this journey. And I think that's almost the most authentic of all, right? To be able to acknowledge that instead of just saying, you know, being so kind of desperate for a reason that you make something up. She was really authentic to herself, and you know, I think by the time she got to Santiago, I saw a changed person. But there are so many different reasons that people walk, and I think that's good to keep in mind as you're going. If you want to have conversations about religion or spirituality, I did find people to be very open. You know, I think it depends maybe on who you're speaking with. I know I can say this, I think having lived in Europe, specifically France and Spain, and spent several weeks in the Netherlands as well, the majority of people I know from there, especially young people, are agnostic, if not strongly atheist. But they tend to, especially the French, love a good conversation. So, you know, I think there are always discussions to be had. And if you are doing it specifically for religious reasons and you're looking for those opportunities, they abound on the Camino. I mean, there are churches, cathedrals all along the way, with ceremonies often specifically for pilgrims, which I encourage everyone to go to, religious or not. So like the one in Roncesvalles is awesome. I think especially at the beginning of your journey, they do a great pilgrim's blessing. And I guess just one final thing, closing thought is, even if you're not walking for religious or spiritual reasons, you're going to have religious or spiritual moments. I mean, that is the Camino magic. Things will happen that you can't explain, magic moments that you know that there's some force out there that is there with you in that time. And I think I've talked about some of my moments. One of my favorite ones was the time I got lost, and I made a specific video about that moment. Got lost leaving Burgos, took a wrong turn, and it just was like, you know, the lessons I took from that situation and kind of what I was able to realize from that, just it made me feel like I really was on a spiritual journey. And, you know, personally, I walked it for a lot of different reasons. I am a spiritual and religious person. It's more of a personal thing for me, so I wasn't extremely vocal about that, but I love to talk, as you may notice, and I was always open, you know, with anybody who wanted to talk about that. So you know, feel free to share below what your reason was for walking the Camino, if you've walked multiple, if that's changed over time, if there's any new reasons I didn't mention here. And yeah, those are my thoughts for now. And if I have other ones, I will make a new video. And I'm sure as I walk additional Caminos in the future, mine will continue to evolve as well. And that's part of, like I said, the magic of this Camino that keeps calling us back. Buen camino, guys.